welcome you to this panel, in which we take up one theme, one issue that is also motto of our festival. We ask, or we try to answer the questions about the phenomenon named cancel culture. This term is often used by the right-wing persons who accuse left that their political correctness is destroying the freedom of art. And sometimes you can get the feeling that they are much less concerned with arts than with conflict with left and with political correctness. But on another side, is also difficult sometimes to deal with political correctness and arts. I will tell you as an introduction example from this summer. I was writing for one publishing house in Germany, one expose about one Croatian novel named "He May Be a Gypsy, but He is the Most Beautiful One." And this is from one song, from one folk song, turbo folk song. And the novel is about love between a Croatian elder woman and a young Rome guy. And the novel is very, very famous in Croatia, very good written, and is totally anti-racistic, but it focused the problem, the relationship between Roma community in Croatia and Croatian community in one small region. It deals also with refugees, and is really good written, and deals also with problems that NGOs and human rights organizations bring to this conflict situation, put in this conflict situation, and so on. But I was on a seminar with translators from Germany, and really each of these translators told me that it's totally impossible to publish the novel with this title in Germany. That's absolutely not possible. So they suggested a title, and now it is title, Foreign Neighbors. But the title is "He May Be a Gypsy, but He's the Most Beautiful One." And in this song, it is a guy who told to his beloved one, "Your father is against me, and if he asks you, then tell him, yes, he is a gypsy, but he is the most beautiful one." So everybody in Croatia recognizes, of course, this song, and this title is very welcomed in the literary scene. But the German translator told me, no, it's not possible. It's not possible to use this word. So then it is, for me, really a problem with this concept, when it is forbidden to use it because of possibility to make difficulties with the Roma community in Germany, but it's somehow cancel culture in this title, in this literary very good book. So it was an introduction for me to show that on the one hand, I am aware that the right-wing people use this term to accuse political correctness and then to make everything possible and to tell things that are, of course, not politically correct. But on another hand, we have also to be aware that sometimes political correctness is a problem for arts. And with this really huge dilemma, I open jetzt our discussion. And with me are Francesca Borri from Italy. She's a very known journalist in Italy and also in Middle East. She's experienced in Kosovo, and her first book was about Kosovo, so he's really someone who knows the situation here. She's a war reporter and human rights reporter, and she knows very good situation in Middle East and in Southeast Asia and in Israel, in Palestine. A really very experienced person, and it's pity that we have no much time to hear about her and other experiences, and not only in this discussion. Then, right from here is Agon Rexhepi from Kosovo. He's a queer poet and activist from Pristina, and human rights activist, student of sociology. He writes poetry, and also he speaks his poems as a spoken poet and slam poet. For me, slam poetry is one of the most beautiful phenomena of the new time. And in my town in Germany, in Münster, I think young people don't read poetry, but slam poetry events are full of young people, and there are very, very good slam poets from whole Europe. So it's really wonderful phenomena for me. It's really great that you are with us in this discussion. And then Ralph Hammerthaler, an old guest of Polip, or not guest, as a guest, not old. You are younger than me. The old guest in Polip, like me too. And he was also a writer in residence in Kosovo, so he knows the city also very well, like Francesca too, and the situation here in Kosovo. He's a very famous writer in Germany, theater writer, essayist, and critic, and novel writer, with very many books he wrote. And one of the last novels, recent novels, is named Kosovo's Daughters. So that is also very interesting for us, that all are also involved in the situation here. But Ralph, you know discussions in Germany very good, and maybe also in literature and theater scene too. All these discussions about identities and multicultural, and so it is really interesting to hear it from all of you, from journalist view, but also from Italy and from Middle East. So you have multiple perspectives on these questions. And now I will tell nothing more, but you are the floor is yours. You are now asked to tell us what you think about it. Francesca, would you like to start, like ladies first, or?
Journalists usually listen first.
Okay, then Ralph, would you like to start?
Yes,
maybe a small overview, how do you see it in Germany in moment, these questions?
Maybe I give you also an example, because example always tells something. So I am close to a theater magazine. It's called Theater der Zeit, Theater of Our Times, you can call it. And 2 years ago, the editorial staff decided to invite the cultural speaker of the right-wing, or let's say extreme right-wing party, AfD, to make an interview. And they need a few photos, and there's also a movement in Germany, they are called Die Vielen. It's difficult to translate, a lot of people, let's say. And they were against any participation in the public discourse of members of this right-wing to extreme right-wing party in theaters, in academies, in institutions. And they smelled it, that there is something in the back, Theater der Zeit, this magazine, and they tried to intervene. And they said, you can't give him a stage for his positions. And if you do that, we cancel abonnements. And this is difficult for a magazine, but they were not so naive that it's just an interview. It should be a dispute. And so they take a very famous man, a scientist in political science, is called Klaus Legevi. Klaus Legevi is really somebody. He has written a book with a title which is now common in the public space. It's called multiculti. So he's really an expert from the other side. So, and it was this dispute. And finally, they did it, and it was a good success. But you see, this was an attempt to cancel positions. But me, I'm very interesting about the right and the right-wing, extreme right-wing positions, because maybe, especially in the eastern part of Germany, they came to power. And I really want to know what ideas they have on, in the cultural field.
Yes,
So,
to deal with it, to discuss with them,
Sure,
or to
sure,
know
sure.
what yes.
But I tell you something, Klaus Legebi from the left wing was the winner.
And do you think they had the feeling that he was winner? They felt that, these right-wing people in discussion with Legebi? Or their feeling was, we are better? What do you think? Because Legebi is really great in discussion, in speaking.
Yeah. This cultural speaker from the AfD is Mark Jongen, to name him. And 10 years ago also, he was assistant of the German master philosopher Peter Sloterdijk. No? It's an interesting biography. So he's not an idiot, but a small one, a small idiot. I don't know how they react on this interview, but really maybe that they've been a little bit proud of having 6 or 8 pages with this dispute with a popular scientist from the left wing. This could be, but I don't know the reaction.
That is important dilemma. If we like to give them space to speak and to formulate things, or not. My first reaction is always no, but then in second thinking, I think, no, it's better to know what they think, and it's better to make it, then you make conflict smaller if you are in discussion. But I don't know, I'm not sure, and now I will...
My first reaction is always yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for the dispute.
My note is, oh no, right wing, no. And then I think, no, it's better to speak in the second. But now I would like to ask Agon, what do you think about it, and what are your experiences, and have you some examples?
Okay. First of all, I like the topic because such topic doesn't take much place in Kosovo, and therefore I think it's very important that we actually start talking about it. Because the situation in Kosovo, I would say, is quite complex. Because, for example, if you talk things that the majority of the people agree with, then you won't be cancelled, and vice versa. If you say things that are mostly about political correctness, that are politically correct, you might get cancelled from the majority of people, which it should kind of probably be the opposite. But, I mean, it's a thin line in between what's freedom of speech and cancel culture, at least in the context of Kosovo. For example, I mean, when you mentioned the poem about Croatia, and actually the book, it was very interesting because it kind of resonated with me here. I think such slurs are acceptable in different societies, and it's a matter of context in general. But in some other societies, such as the Western or the American society, where the cancel culture is very, let's just say, used and very common within people, it's quite different. For example, here, you get to listen to such slurs on a daily basis when especially referring to the marginalized communities, whether that includes the Roma, Ashkari Egyptian communities, LGBT community, and other marginalized communities. And because people are so normalized and exposed to such slurs, they don't think anybody should be cancelled for using those type of words. And you know, sometimes it makes me question whether it comes from a place of hate or just from a place of ignorance, because people are not very informed about the, let's just say, the right words they should use when talking about specifically these marginalized communities. And that's why I say it's a complex situation, because, for example, if you say such things, and when you talk about probably those marginalized communities, or you say other things that the majority of people don't agree with, then you might be publicly canceled within people. But on the other hand, for example, like if you go on public spheres and you talk about such things and you use a lot of slurs and all that, because most of the people are exposed to those things, they won't necessarily cancel you. But on the other hand, I think it's I don't know if canceling people is the right way to do, because you can cancel a person, but you're not contributing to changing their opinions in general, because it's a much bigger problem than just a person's or individual's problem. Let's put it that way. And also, for example, I think. For example, if people with a huge platform, I think they should be careful on what they say, and especially not to kind of share disinformation, because that was very common in Kosovo during the pandemic. There were public figures, saying that the pandemic doesn't exist, the virus doesn't exist, and such things. And obviously, in those cases, they should be censored. Let's put it that way. And we have to kind of use this public cancel culture in which we don't allow them to spread such disinformation. Let's put it that way. But on the other hand, people should have the freedom to speak, because I think that's the way they can actually change their opinions. Let me, if I have more time, I would just like to explain this. For example, as an LGBTQ plus activist, I get such homophobic comments to people all the time. And if I'm just going to call them out for being homophobic, I'm not contributing in any ways towards changing their opinion. Because homophobes are okay with being labeled or called homophobes. So if you just cancel them for what they say, it's not that you're going to change their opinions or something like that. And for some reason, I know it's easier sometimes just to cancel people, but it's not very common, and still it's just going to create some barriers between us two, and we're never going to actually have the chance to sit down and to talk about it and to try to explain it to one another. So that's kind of the problem that I have with cancel culture and freedom of speech in general. But as I said, there's a thin line in between where you actually have the right and to talk and to share your opinions, but also at the same time not to spread disinformation or also oppress or I don't know, stereotypize any of the communities or any of the social groups. So yeah, that's it pretty much. But also, sorry, for example, a thing that we have to focus on is anybody's lives or identities are not a matter of opinions. So, for example, nobody can come to you. I mean, since I'm more engaged with the LGBT community and I get to talk more about this issue, I can talk more about it. My identity, my life, it's not a matter of anybody's opinion. So that's not freedom of speech. But I don't mind people questioning homosexuality, which means you have to respect the identity of other people, but it is okay, it is understandable, especially, on the social context of Kosovo, to have such questions about such things. And if you cancel people because they have questions about homosexuality, about queer parents and all that, we're never going to have the chance to actually sit down and talk about it and try to exchange ideas and perspectives from one another.
I agree with you on in all these things. Context is very important, and then identities are not part of negotiations of another people, and so. One question: what is with arts? And one question: do you think that I am novel writer, may write good novel about homosexual men? That's really question in new time. So, not am I allowed? Allowed you can write, but everything and then okay. But it is possible. It is and why I asked it. Very famous French author Flaubert told one, Emma Bovary, c'est moi. Emma Bovary, one woman described in his novel, is not a real woman. He is literary product of Flaubert. And he, as a very famous writer, told it very proudly. And if I would write such a book like this, I would this homosexual man, c'est moi. I produced it. But today Flaubert would have problem, I think, with this, with all women movement and I know feminists and so. And maybe me, if I would write some novel like this, I would also have problem. But what do you think about it? Because art is something another as all this another discourses. It's only question. I have no answer.
Absolutely. I mean, these questions are very complex. I don't think they have a right nor wrong answer to such questions. Actually, I do like this question because I was in a situation like this a few days ago. So I'm currently a resident in Belgrade in this artist residency, and I had to interview LGBTQ plus people, and those interviews I have to kind of transcript into poems. And I was struggling whether I should personalize those stories or not. Because, for example, there were stories of transgender men, transgender women, which I'm very privileged when it comes to such matters. And I didn't know if I should write like about them or I should personalize their story and make it kind of my own. And thus, I had a question with myself, and I also tried to talk to other people to see other perspectives as well, because for me it was hard to actually come to terms what is correct and what is fair in this case.
Yeah.
So when you ask me about that, I think it very much depends the access and the kind of perspective and approach that you have to such matters. If there are, let's just say, LGBTQ plus people who can write for themselves, it's much better to give them their space and their place, and not to let any other person take that space for whatever reason that might be. If I'm making sense. Which means, for example, it is okay, of course, it's very needed actually to write about different groups, but it's much better if you just try to share your perspective on that group and not to try to kind of, I don't know, make more visible what those kind of people have to go through, because you're as a privileged person and your approach might be problematic to them. So, for example, it's much easier to kind of try to, let's just say, to empower people and make them talk for themselves, and not for you to be the voice of other people, if that makes sense.
It makes, but for me, it's still not the answer about arts. If I think about Flaubert, but in this moment the women didn't write, of course, novels, and he gave profile and voice to this Emma Bovary, but it was not his intention. His intention was not to speak about problems of women. He liked to write it. He liked to be heard. He liked it as an artist. And that is the moment, but we have not to discuss it to the end, but that is the moment where I have problem with all identities, because I think artists can imagine it, and he can try, or she can try, and then you can read and tell, okay, Alida, your novel is shit, or oh, you wrote it really good. So you fits in these feelings in this person. But we can stop there.
No, sorry, just a few more things. I mean, as I said, I think there's a thin line in between these two options. Because on the other hand, why not let people talk about themselves? I think nobody else can understand what a person goes through if they don't speak for themselves. But on the other hand, I think when it comes to women or marginalized groups, since they don't have the chaser that, let's just say, heterosexual, privileged people, cisgender men have, then I think it's much better to kind of try to not stereotype and not talk about the other people. So personally, I wouldn't mind having someone talking about the experiences of, let's just say, LGBTQ plus people. It would be very interesting to try to see how they are going to empathize with us, and what's their perspective on this. But on the other hand, if I would know that a queer person might be much more better on putting this into words, then that would be questioning.
That's a moment. Okay, yes, very good, thank you. And now our journalist. Yes, you heard enough?
Everything I am today is basically because of Kosovo, because I was here for a few months in 2004, so Pristina was really totally different. We barely had electricity. And for me, I was 24 years old. I was a university student. I was at the end. And I came here for an internship at the Embassy of Italy. At the time, it wasn't an embassy because Kosovo was not a state yet. And I was in the visa office, no? So basically, my job was to deny a visa to whoever, no exception.
No exception.
And well, there are also many ways you can deny a visa. And the way Italy, and I guess other European states were denying visas to you, to all of you in the Balkans at the time, not only in Kosovo, was really humiliating because procedures were not public. I mean, we couldn't know the rules, so they were really a secret for everybody, including us. And we had, you know, the embassy was in Dragodan, so it was like living in a spaceship in the hills. We were forbidden, of course, to come down to Pristina because you were dangerous. And we had to stay in Dragodan. And basically, we had 2 floors, no, in this building, 3 floors, actually. The 3rd one was the diplomatic floor. So in the 2 floors of the visa office, there was, you know, a phone number, of course, because if you wanted a visa to Italy, a Schengen visa, you had to get an appointment first, so call. And my job was, you know, one day I was basically on the first floor picking up the phone and saying, oh, yes, but this is the wrong number. You have to call the other number, ground floor, which was empty because I was at the first floor. And then the following day, I was on the ground floor, and, you know, I picked up the phone and said, oh, you know, yes, but you need an appointment, and this is the wrong number. You have to call, you know, the other number, first floor, which was empty because I was on the ground floor. And I did this for several months. I was a student in Florence, and actually I studied international law, human rights law, and with basically the founder of the International Criminal Court and the chief judge of the International Tribunal in The Hague, Professor Antonio Cassese. So I was quite a human rights specialist, and that was my job. And at some point, one day, actually, a man arrived in Italy by boat. Actually, it happened to arrive in Bari, where I was born, in the south of Italy, so it was my hometown, with his brother, because he couldn't get a visa, actually couldn't get an appointment. And he died because he had cancer and was terminally ill. And I had no doubt it was his human right to get into Italy and to get a treatment, and then the visa issue was something to deal with later. He died, and so I just knocked on the door, you know, on the head of the visa office. And I was really, you know, starting to feel a little bit, I was start to question, you know, everything. And I remember she said, there were all these, basically, people. My house was next to the embassy, so in the morning I had just to, since it was dangerous, of course, I had just to walk like 200 meters in the morning, and that was Pristina for us, just this small space. And there was this long queue of Albanians waiting outside in the cold. It was November, December, January. It was really, really cold, day and night, because nobody was answering. And I had to go every morning. And they stared at me. And I had to, you know, to look downstairs. I was really feeling really shameful. And the head of the visa office told me, at some point I opened the door and I said, look, how come? How can you come, you know, this morning, look at these people? I mean, what's the point of what we are doing? And she said, she closed the door and she said, look, it's because you are young, but it's easy. Never open a door in your life, never open. And that became the title of my first book, Never Open. And then I left Kosovo. And I think all my life I've been opening doors. And so now I'm a war reporter, actually. And I live in the Middle East. And I live, you know, in countries where the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and any kind of freedoms we might think are not really, are quite in danger. And I'm a specialist of jihadist. And so for me, when I heard for the first time, you know, this expression, cancel culture, consider that I'm Italian, so I mean, we come from fascism. So when we hear of cancel culture, it's something that, yeah, it's really, it reminds us of Mussolini, basically. And, my job is basically, I live with terrorists. Because I write for the weekly of La Repubblica, one of Italy's main newspapers, but then my real newspaper, I write for Israel's main newspaper, Yediot Ahronot, and I work for Al Jazeera, so I'm not Jewish nor Arab. And so basically, my job is to try to understand why jihadists and Islamists are what they are and do what they do. And that's really when you see cancel culture, because basically it's a forbidden job. So when you try, you know, even with movements like Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Taliban in Afghanistan, okay, terrorism is a tactic, no? But the point is that when it comes to Hamas, Hezbollah, or even the Taliban, these are movements deeply rooted in a country, are much more, you know, that what they do militarily, really much more than that. the Islamic State is more like a terrorist group, but even the Taliban, under my point of view, are not. They can use extreme violence, extreme brutality, but technically speaking, you can't speak, of a terrorist group. And the point is, when you try to understand them, in Western mainstream media, which is the media I work for, there's a wall. And it's totally, when you try to explain what Hamas is, it's curious because it's 2 years ago, I interviewed, I'm the only Western journalist Hamas talks to, which is curious. Why? Because I write for Israel's main newspaper, but I'm not Jewish, so they can speak to Israel without speaking to an Israeli. And it tells a lot about the Middle East today. And so 2 years ago, I met Yahya Sinwar, who is the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He basically offered peace to Israel. And we couldn't find any Western newspaper willing to run this interview. He wasn't offering war, he was offering peace. Why? Because it's a terrorist group. We don't want to hear from him. And which was the only newspaper eager to read it, the Israeli newspaper. And I have to see that it's really strange for me because when I arrived in the Middle East in 2007, I was working as a human rights specialist for a Palestinian leader, and now, I write for Israel's main newspaper. The real freedom of the press, at least for what I work on, Islamists and jihadists, for me, is in the Israeli newspaper. Why? Because these are their neighbors. They want to know them. Maybe they are their enemy for most of Israelis. They want to know the enemy. Or some of them, they want to know the neighbors. But when it comes to the European media, there's nothing. I mean, you can't write nothing. The Taliban, for example, I was reading this morning, 1 hour ago, the news from Afghanistan, there was an op-ed saying, this new prime minister of, the Taliban, or the new leader of the Taliban, he pretends to be called in Arabic, in English would say, should be the translation, the commanders of the faithful, no? And from this definition, the columnist was saying, this is going to be, well, do you know which other country, for example, the king of Morocco, the most moderate one, is the commander of the faithful? Do you know which country in the Middle East has one of Sharia law as a main source of law? Palestine. If you go to Jerusalem, I think you don't feel there is Sharia law in force. So, the world is really quite different from, and my latest book is from the Maldives, because basically it turns out that the Maldives are the non-Arab country with the highest number per capita of foreign fighters in Syria. I met Maldivians in Syria, that's why I decided to go to the Maldives, is how come that from this paradise you come to fight in Syria, then you go to the Maldives and you realize that this place where many Westerners go, including, I guess, many journalists, they don't even realize it's a Muslim country. So we are so blind to the world that, the Maldives, how many of you know that the Maldives are an Islamic country? Where I say Islamic more than Afghanistan, with a strict Sharia law, the Saudi version of Sharia law, which means that during Ramadan, I was there during Ramadan, if you just have a chewing gum, not even if you drink or eat, you can get arrested. And in the Maldives, there are slashes, there are, punishment, public punishments in the main square. It's just the capital city, and then all around, it's our paradise. So definitely, when you said by instinct, I would say, no, I don't want to know, I don't want to hear from you. No, absolutely, my answer is open the door immediately, or if you don't open the door, someone, will open the door for you, but with an RPG or Kalashnikov fire. So it's better if you open the door before it gets open anyway. Definitely.
Francesca, that is only so many things that are so important in your speech now, but only this Maldives picture, this touristic paradise shows how sinless this tourism is.
And for me, it's been really, I've been in so many war countries, and the most dangerous place for me has been the Maldives. There are no firearms, no guns. It's an island, it's an archipelago, actually. There are knives, but it's terribly dangerous because there is street violence, gangs. Why? Because basically all the international hotels, resorts are owned by small groups of Maldivians together with international businessmen, so the local population gets nothing. And there's just drug and violence in the capital city. And when my book was out in English, then I was subject to a cancel culture campaign from jihadists in the Maldives. It was scaring. So I've been also subject twice in my life to a, I don't know, I don't use the cancel culture term. It's more for me as a journalist a campaign where they really attack you with brutality. And it happened to me twice. One jihadist, but that's interesting. Well, in Italy, because I dared to speak out against the exploitation of freelancers. When I was in Syria, we were paid 70 euros per story from Aleppo. And when I published this story, well, that's cancel culture. So my freedom, as a journalist, as a human rights specialist, I mean, in my previous life, I would have never imagined that if I have to choose, one country where really I have less freedom as a journalist, Italy. Italy, because it's the country I'm a national of. So whenever you touch power, it's over. It's over. In Syria, in Iraq, even in Afghanistan, and the Taliban told me, oh, you are coming because I'm moving to Kabul this winter. Oh, you will be our special guest. Why? Because I'm going there to somehow try to understand their point of view. But when I'm the author of 4 investigative stories in Italy, when you touch power, doesn't matter that its power is in Italy, in France, or is in Turkey. It depends. Whenever you touch power, it's over. Yeah, it's over.
Oh, now it's difficult for me to switch to think from earlier, but I like to ask Ralph something. And you wrote a novel, Kosovo's Daughter. So you had feminist issue, there is a feminist group, and also foreign country issue. That is my question. You are now Flaubert of Kosovo, you have women and Kosovo, and that was this question, are we allowed to write? We are allowed, but it is okay for now feminist groups in Kosovo that Ralph wrote in German his novel? I think yes, but we can discuss it, or how do you feel about it, Ralph? It is a feeling that is somehow cultural appropriation, I take something from Kosovo, or it's feeling I like to explain to Germans and to Europe some phenomena that I understood in Kosovo, or something like that. What is your intention behind a novel about women in Kosovo?
My feelings are fine. It's a good book, I think. But I know this reproach of cultural appropriation, but I don't like this term because in the cultural field, I think we have a fluid world. There is no property, a very, very fluid world. And when I try as a writer to tell about, for example, about Kosovo, I need some empathy and I need imagination. These are the most important instruments in writing literature. And with these instruments, I try to understand and I try to develop characters, and also the reader, as well as I did it, the reader tries with the help of empathy and imagination to understand this character. And so this is this wonderful way literature gives to us to to go a step beyond our very close world, our very narrow world. And I would propose to talk about cultural approach. So it could be successful or not. No, this is the other thing. As you said, good book or bad book. So it's a bad book, then it's a bad book from the literary. The infants, about a baby. In the very beginning of our life, the baby is watching its hands, fingers. Could be my hand, I'm not sure. So the baby starts to play, to move the fingers. And if it's successful, so the brain is happy. No, my hand, these are my fingers. So from the very beginning of our life, we started to play, to act. So it's inborn of every human being. So I would suggest that the black should act as whites, the Albanians should act as Chinese people, the proletarians should act as kings, and the disabled person should act as Germans. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Yes. It is in the very origin of theater. It was very origin. There were no women till 20th century or something, but it was theater, and very good drama were written in time of antique drama or Shakespeare or another playwright without women as an actress. And of course, I am for women in theater, but we see that it was possible, and it's maybe really difficult today with all these identity discourses to see what is art behind this idea of identities. But I understand if you, of course, as somebody who faces problems as a minority group, to tell, no, moment, now we are speaking, now we are on charge, now we would like to tell our story because we are so, we face disgrace for us, and nobody likes us, and everybody is against us. So now we would like to tell our stories. That is another moment. We are in somehow a revolutionary moment for all minorities. On one hand, it is really like, it is stupid that only black can play Othello, because it's stupid. Then there is only one role in whole Shakespeare for blacks. They can speak, of course, all roles, and Othello can be played from a white actor, of course. But on another hand, I can understand if blacks tell, no, we don't like. We would like to now to decide what we play and who play our roles, etc. So what is your opinion in this?
Again, it's a complex topic in general. Like, I don't know how I would personally feel about this, because both sides make sense, but I'm absolutely yes for representation of people themselves, because as I said earlier, nobody can understand them like they actually do. And that's why I think it's very important that you kind of separate trying to personalize their story and just trying to tell their story. So, for example, coming to Kosovo is the most isolated country in the Europe, with, a very poor country, let's put it that way. Lots of social and political problems. And, like trying to personalize the story of these people coming from a privileged perspectives, I don't know how that would turn out to the majority of people, which I would understand. But at the same time, if you try to use your platform to explain to your people what is going on in Kosovo, then we're talking about something else. So, for example, that's when I was in Belgrade, I was trying to talk to people, and I consider myself privileged. Even though I'm from a minority, I am very privileged. I even have the chance to go to Belgrade and interview people there, right? Fully accepted and all that. So I was very careful with my approach, because I didn't want them to feel that I'm personalizing their stories, because I don't go through what they go through every single day. And for example, I think it also depends on the context of the country. For example, I think in Kosovo, it's very important that, for example, in theater plays, you have people talking to themselves, because We have basic representation and basic spaces for people who are not cisgender white men. That's why I think nobody can, I mean, even though it's art and you try to empathize and imaginate, I think it's also very important, your approach and what you try to do with a specific role. If you have people coming from that marginalized specifically, I think it's very important that you give them that platform. Because nobody understands. I'm repeating, no matter how much you try to empathize, no matter how much you try to imaginate, you will never understand how a person speaks for themselves. Again, it's very important to use your platform and to talk to other people about a specific group, if that makes sense. So, for example, that's why I said, personally, I might be kind of have different opinions on this, but I try to understand what the majority of people thinks. So, yeah, I mean, I think people should speak for themselves, because it is the time to do so. For example, yes, before, I mean, years ago and centuries ago, you didn't have women in theater plays, and we all know what that was happening. And now, for example, we don't have much openly LGBTQ plus actors who can play such roles, because we all know the reason why that still is a thing. So yeah, I think it's very important to kind of just separate those kind of things, trying to tell somebody stories from your perspective and trying to give them that platform and not personalizing the story because you are a privileged person and you have to be aware of your privileges. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes, yes, for me, definitely. But for me, it's some, maybe I'm wrong, and I open it, of course, for discussion. It's some moment of a revolution. Mm-hmm. But after that, I think it's necessary to change it. It's necessary that the LGBT person definitely can play in theater, privileged person. Yes. Absolutely. Because if we reduce them, if we reduce all minorities only on their identities, then we make ghettos for them. So it is in this revolutionary moment, I understand you totally, because women are making this way also, mm-hmm. and so. But in one very moment, if you told your story, from this moment, is necessary to open this identity mm-hmm. issue mm-hmm. and to change it, because we are now, for my opinion, too much in identities. So this example, I gave it in this introduction mm-hmm. About translation from Amanda mm-hmm. Gorman. Mm-hmm. Because she is a black young woman, it was the idea only black young woman can translate her. But that is mm-hmm. stupid. It is stupid, because it was a very, very, very famous translator in Spain, one man, mm-hmm. white man, mm-hmm. and he was not allowed to translate her. But that is the end of translation, end of everything, because if we really deal like this, then okay, only black young women can translate black young women. But mm-hmm. tomorrow, one young black woman would like to translate Shakespeare. No, it's not allowed. Shakespeare is not black young woman. Mm-hmm. And then that is auto goal, like in football, you know, for minorities. They really, for me, for my opinion, they have to go out of this identity issue. But in this very revolutionary moment, I understand you, because you need the visibility, you need your voice, you need that the people hear this voice. After that is, for me, definitely necessary to cut it. But
as I said, it's a very complex topic, and sometimes I question where do I stand in all this, because it's not just black and white, it's much more diverse and complex than that. I think also it's a matter of knowing your privileges. And for example, I would understand the need of having a black, queer, let's say, woman and trying to have translators who can understand her pain and who could wear her shoes. Because as I said, nobody than the oppressed person understands what oppression is like towards that specific type of thing, if that makes sense. And also I think it depends from the context of the country. For example, in Germany, I'm assuming that the social problems are much different than here. That's why you might have LGBT actors playing all other roles or vice versa, but in Kosovo you still have basic representation of such roles as stereotypically as they can, I don't know, make them, but still you lack such representation, for example. So I think it's also a matter of the context of the society and of the people you're collaborating with. Then you might have a different approach again. But as I said, I don't know where I stand, because on one hand, I do understand, for example, this kind of case. I mean, if we have a book, let's say, a poetry book from a black queer woman, it would make sense if people would want a queer person, a queer black person to translate that book, because they might come from kind of the same oppression. And also, like, when you translate, it's not a matter of translation necessarily, but it's your identity as a translator, what you put into that. And you won't ever understand somebody's pain if you don't go through it yourself. For example, I am an LGBTQ+ activist, but I try not to talk about transgender people or other people that are part of the community because I don't know their struggles. I might be informed what was going on with them, but I'd rather have them talk about themselves and try to have them talking about the challenges that they face because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, and not me specifically, even though I'm an activist and I try to talk about everybody. So, you know, I understand both parts. I think, for example, if on that book she would talk about being a black queer woman, then it is important that you have queer black people translating that. But it's enough if it's a book about, you know, in general, things that any translator could translate. So as I said, it's a complex, and sometimes I question where do I stand in all this.
But it's definitely worth discussion, all these things. And we need these discussions because we are now in the moment in the world with all these issues, also in very many conflicts. And we saw that the right-wing persons use it and show on the left and of all these activities groups like they cancel culture, they are against culture. So we need also answers on some arguments from their side.
Absolutely, yes.
In these discussions. And Francesca, you have experience in the Middle East and in Israel and Maldives. What are your experiences with these minority groups there? Are they articulating them? Are they searching for their expression?
When you said, you know, it's time for us to have our own voice, well, you know, here, I'm a war reporter, not the voice of the voiceless. It's really, I mean, it's not like that. Take Syria, which has been my first war, you know. Syrians never had their own voice. You probably don't even know that the war is still going on, because we left and Syria disappeared from the news, from everything. There is this illusion today that since there are social networks, since there is Facebook, there is Instagram, now there is TikTok, so, you know, the old media somehow, all the mainstream media are less powerful than before, so, you know, there are no filters, and if there is something that really matters, it will break through and reach everything and everybody. It's absolutely not like that. We still matter, journalists. I mean, we still have power. We decide what you will know and what you won't know. Absolutely. And when I was, for example, before the Islamic State established formally the caliphate, so before Mosul, the Islamic State was already in Syria. And at some point, they took Raqqa. And at the time, there were just a few of us still allowed by jihadis to stay inside Syria. I was one of the few. And so we talked, and we said, look, we have to go to Raqqa. We want to see how is this city under the rule of the Islamic State. Now, it happened. We were lucky, because our main translator was basically a university professor of American literature. That's why he started working for us at the beginning of when the war was still a revolution. And then, basically, he got radicalized together with the war. So he was at the beginning what I would say a secular Muslim. Then he joined the rebels. Then he joined Al-Qaeda, which was al-Nusra in Syria. Then at some point he joined Islamic State. So we had our channel, you know, just our way to get in touch with Islamic State. We asked them, and I remember there was the BBC asking them, can we come? And I said, no, we don't need anyone, because we are the story. And whoever, we will tell the story directly, because we don't trust you, Western media. So in the end, we are the story. So whoever comes to Raqqa, even the first passes by, and the story will go viral and everybody in the world will read the story. This is what they did. They actually picked up a guy from Germany, a strange guy who was half a politician, half an activist, half a journalist, half who knows what. And this guy went to Raqqa for 1 week, 10 days, with his son. And he wrote even a book. He wrote a story, he wrote everything. No one published that story. No one. Went totally nothing. We just ignore, because basically it was a work that lacked any, minimum journalistic standard. So we simply ignored it. So it's not true, that you have you have social networks, all journalism. And the point is, I mean, if you read this main book, Flat Earth News, the point is, ask yourself who journalists are today, well, journalism doesn't exist anymore because basically it's based on freelancers underpaid, Who can afford to be a journalist today? Only the rich, only those. And, but it's not only journalism. Take the UN, so my previous life, Who is a UN diplomat, a UN officer today? Someone who could afford, when he was a student, to go, from one internship to next in, I don't know, in Geneva, and then, for 2, 3, 4 years, someone who could afford, thanks to the family, afford to work for free, basically, and not for 3 months, but for 3 years. Journalism is the same. So this is the big filter today. So when I think of cancel culture, the main cancel culture, okay, there are campaigns, but when you have a campaign, you also can have a counter-campaign, So if someone is targeted, cancel culture, well, you can react, because you can, I'm not really scared by a campaign. This is something that happens, and you try to fight back. What I'm really scared is the real cancel culture of our time. Well, as an old name, it's called inequality. It's inequality that will never give you voice. It's not a cancel culture.
That is very, very, very good, Francesca. Thank you so much. You put some very important things also.
It's because my second name is Marxiana, actually. So it's sometimes we forget.
Quality of journalism. We are living in a moment.
When in Flat Earth News, Nick Davis, the book was written 20 years ago. If you read it today, the crisis of journalism today, and I mean, I speak of journalism not only because I'm a journalist, but because your work also as artists, as everything, is based on the reality, we tell you. And if we don't tell you anything about the Maldives, for example, it's really, for me, was astonishing, the idea that no one told the story before me. I couldn't believe it. And the point is, Nick Davis says, the main issue with today's journalism is that we have to write 10 stories per day. And so, which means that we don't even get out. We just take everything online. We copy from our journalists. No one checks anything anymore. Yes. Especially in Italy, which is not really famous for the quality of journalism, they say, oh, you are always on the field, And I mean, where should I stay? It's like an exception now, English is still, if you are a reporter, or the exception, you are a staff, you are a desk journalist. I mean, you are in the newsroom, but basically, if you are a reporter, it means that you are somewhere around, collecting information, collecting news. In Italy, you have the opposite. You have journalists who are due to stay in front of a screen, and then we have the giornalisti sul campo, journalists on the field, who are the exception. Those who are in the streets, basically doing journalism.
But it is during your speech, I thought how a point of connection between journalism and literature in somehow very, very important mode also for the Balkans was the question between Peter Handke, we mentioned him yesterday, and journalism. And I met in Stockholm, as I was on the protest against the Nobel Prize, Roy Gutman, American war journalist and a person on field like you, who was in Bosnia and who was the first person to discover concentration camps. And he wrote about it, and he was also awarded with Pulitzer Prize in America for this discovering of concentration camps. And Peter Handke denied these concentration camps. He was not there, but as an author, as a writer, he imagined that that is not true. And I was in Stockholm, and I was a witness of a meeting of prisoners from camp, survivors, one group, 100 Bosnian men, survivors, with Roy Gutman. It was so touching that now I can have tears as I saw it. Small man, because he's an old journalist, he came from New York to see them, and prisoners came from all over Europe to see him because they survived thanks to his story. And this meeting was in the moment, very moment, we protested against Nobel Prize to Peter Handke, who make really ugly jokes with the name of Roy Gutman, who told Roy Gutman was an idiot, journalist, who doesn't know anything, because Peter Handke, as a writer, as an artist, knows the truth. And the question, how do you know this truth? Yeah, because I'm artist. And on the other hand, was this journalist, and due to him survived these people. So it was really the question of life and death. And now I remember this because you made us aware about the role of journalists today. It's a very, very important issue for me. Because, and then it's the question of representation. Mm-hmm. They represent, but it's necessary, of course, we have these representatives of, in the question of Bosnia, of prisoners of concentration camps. They need Roy Gutman as an American, white man journalist, but he was in this moment the person who can represent them. So I'm really together also.
You know, there is also something really dangerous that I try to explain my readers. There is this idea also today that everything is online, no?
Yes,
or can be online.
Yes.
And the point is, when I went, and then everything is in English. No? Now, since I live in the Arab world, I know very well that usually what is happening in the Arab let's say, internet sphere is quite different from what's happening in the English-speaking sphere. And that's why so many things are totally lost by Western reporters. But I remember when I arrived in the Maldives, well, why no one knows? Because there is a local language which is not in Google Translate, because of course, what was the point in having Google Translate, you know, this language spoken only in the Maldives? So basically, everything that goes on, you know, in the Maldivian society, for us is totally, we can't see it because it's not in English. And this idea that everybody speaks English, everybody is, usually, I mean, if you really travel, but basically no one speaks English, and not enough to really express, you know, but just go to Italy, you know, and try to speak English with Italians. Try to really speak English. I mean, not just try to say, you know, just coffee and cappuccino. And also the idea that everything is online, I always think, you know, especially because now, especially with war reporters, there is this idea, oh, you know, we don't want to send you in dangerous areas, so let's see online. There are activists online, no? So let's rely on activists. Well, I always think, but do you really think that on the front line we have electricity, and that if we have electricity we are wasting our time, you know, posting something on Facebook? Do you have any idea what the front line is? That's why I'm not basically on social network. You just find my main work, well, for two reasons. First, safety. I can't really say where I am most of the time. Secondly, because most of my time I have no electricity. And every time somebody tells me, oh, you know, but it's online. No, the world is not online.
Ooh, yeah, I guess the world is not online.
Well, try. You can do an experiment. Before being a journalist, I've been a human rights specialist in the Middle East. Now, since I was working for Mustafa Barghouti, who is one of the main Palestinian leaders. So Mustafa Barghouti is also the mediator between Hamas and Fatah for this famous national unity government that will never happen. He's still mediating. And so it's quite a confidential role. Try to find something about what I was doing before being a journalist. Try on Google. There is nothing, because we didn't want anything to be online. There is nothing online. Try to find something about my life before 2012. There was internet before 2012. There is nothing. Nothing.
You will say important things are not online.
No, there is a way you try. I mean, you can also try with some of your old, probably, classmates, former classmates. Try to find know why Facebook was created for that. Try, and you will see that at least for half of your former classmates, 2/3 of them, there is nothing. And then, you know, of course, usually, you know, journalists use a lot Wikipedia. I think we all use a lot Wikipedia, and I always remember what Philip Roth was trying, you know, to edit his own page, because probably you read what he wrote about Wikipedia. At some point on his Wikipedia page, there was something about one of his novels, saying that one of the main character was inspired by a friend of his wife. The character was an horrible character, so the friend complained and everything, and he tried to change the Wikipedia page, saying, look, the character was not inspired, and I know that because I'm the writer, and Wikipedia doesn't allow that, because, you know, you are the author, so every information on Wikipedia must come not from the person directly involved, but by another source. So Philip Roth can't say anything on Wikipedia about Philip Roth.
But he didn't find a way to do it?
No, absolutely.
No?
And it happened to me the same when the jihadis from the Maldives hacked, you know, the Wikipedia page. So my Wikipedia page is a nightmare. We gave up. We tried, because every 2 days they were changing it, posting, you know, things that made no sense. And there was no way for me not even to prove to Wikipedia that I actually have a degree in law and another degree in political science and blah, 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 nothing. And Wikipedia said, well, because the proof of your degree must be online. How come the proof, how come? I mean, there is also privacy law. How come that my degree can be nothing? I can't even prove, you know, that I have a degree. I can prove anything, not even my name. So this is Wikipedia, and we rely a lot on it. And so can you imagine, I mean, online, when we think everything is online, and online, that's the place where the voiceless can get voice? Absolutely not.
Oh, we will never have answer on this digital world. And with all these problems in our world, it's really, really difficult. And so I come to get back to Ralph, because Ralph is here the writer and artist and theater man. Ralph, do you think that we have, as a now on Literary Festival, as people who deal also with words and with literature, future in our things that we do? Or all these things, identity, struggles, and online life, and so will kill our arts and our theater?
No, not at all.
What is your future projection?
No. Maybe we will get a new mission, and literature and theater becomes more important too. I think in the background there is another conflict, not the conflict about so-called collective identities or something like that. The conflict is a conflict of distribution of recognition, attention, career opportunities, and money, of course. Mm-hmm. And this is a political conflict. It's not a conflict of the art. Mm-hmm. And here you have to be as the person on the place to request and so on. And this is very, very, very important. And maybe in art there is some transformation of all the things, but we as the artists, we try to get all this influence from society, different characters, different persons from all edges and margins of society and think together all this. Maybe we are successful or not. Maybe we fail, of course. No, there are shitty novels, of course.
Yes.
And they should be criticized, of course. But this is an opportunity to think things and groups of society in one place. That is the place of the novel. And the more the society is divided and, as today, is obsessed by its own restrictions, I think, the more literature is necessary to split all these concepts as I see them.
I think you mentioned an important issue of economics. Somehow, sometimes, it seems to me that all these identity struggles cover problem of economics and this whole question of class.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we forget this class issue because we are now all in identity problems and who is privileged, who not.
But we need,
Yes.
We need solidarity for the political fight. You and me. No?
Yes.
Never mind whether I'm an artist and you're an activist or so. We need this solidarity. But instead of it, we are fighting against each other with this concept of collective identity. I don't know what it is.
Yes.
I don't know.
Because for literature and for artists, it's really difficult to tell what is collective identity, because what is a book with collective identity? It's not possible. The persons and everything in a novel are, of course, individual. And for me, I have a really problem. I know it from Germany, from very young. My I don't know the name in English, Patenkind. I don't know what is the name. I was a godmother of this girl, and this girl is very with very blonde hair and very German. But he has best friend of her is black, and my goddaughter is very in this Black Lives Matters in Germany involved, and she's very white and very German, and she's always speaking about her privileges. I, as a white person, I'm privileged, and she's totally in this issue. And of course, I support her because she's a wonderful girl, and I'm proud of her because she's interested in these issues. But somehow she's also somehow funny because she's so totally like a German, and so. But in this Black Lives Matter and everything, she's always speaking about privileges, and that is really difficult because there are, of course, persons in Germany. They are Germans, and they are men, and they are hetero, and they are everything, and they are not privileged. They are I don't know, without work and alcoholic and something, or have unhappy family, and now they are depressive and something. And so what it means, group. And my goddaughter is always like, no, as a white you are always privileged. But of course not. So it is now for me discourse of this movement, and I understand her and her friends. They are black and so, but it's a discourse, and it's not true. Privileged, what does it mean? Because we cannot speak for everybody, also not for this white hetero man. We cannot speak for him. But he's the most privileged person in the world in this moment, and that is a problem for me, because that is, I don't know.
All the problems that you mentioned that white heterosexual people might have, black people might have as well, but white people don't get discriminated because of their race.
Yes.
And that's exactly the idea why I am privileged as a white person, let's just say, even though it's questionable whether the Balkans are actually white people.
Yeah.
If you don't get discriminated, if you don't get lack of basic access to such things because of any part of your identities, then of course you're privileged if you can do the opposite of that, if that makes sense.
Yes, but for me it's a problem with ghettoization of black people in this moment. Because if I define, as my goddaughter does, they are not privileged. Somehow I victimize them. Somehow I take their proud, because why? Why they are not privileged? Because of, in this moment, I also argue racistic, because you understand. So for me, it is a time of revolution, and it's okay with these slogans. But I hope we will come to time we left these slogans behind us, because I have problem with some of them.
You know, it's a journey until we get to that phase that minorities don't have to, you know, just to prove you that they exist and they have basic rights.
Yes, it's like a journey.
That's a modern, let's just say, what's the word? That would be the best option, the best scenario we can possibly have of a society.
We left it behind, and we act
but
as
it's
individuals.
Going to take time.
And yes, it's going to take time. Yes, it's definitely.
I mean, and that's the reason, for example, why Black Lives Matter campaign is very viral right now, because the Black people and also people who stand against racism are finding ways to actually raise awareness about this issue that has been there all the time, but it was never a main thing in the world, let's put it that way. And I mean, as you mentioned, everybody is less privileged than somebody in a specific aspect, if that makes sense. But for example, I might not be privileged not to travel, but it's not that my life is under, let's just say, under any danger because of my race. So that makes me privileged when it comes to my race, if that makes sense. So I might lack some privileges that somebody else do, but I have some other privileges that somebody else lack. That's how it is. Like, you're not fully, but let's just say the public sphere, the most privileged people are usually white heterosexual men, because they have more access, they lack much less discrimination and stereotypes, and when accessing or when having opportunities.
That is like this, but we really have to think always about class, about these differences, because in the same time we struggle about all these issues, and it is very important to do like this. We have 1% of population in the world is rich, like I don't know, and all other people are very poor. And this gap between rich and poor is really for every day bigger. So maybe we do it in the wrong way, maybe, because this gap, and that was this economic issue, is growing and growing. And maybe we should also be aware about class and about this problem always. Not only about identities, but always about class problem within identity problems.
Absolutely. It's very important to talk about that kind of oppression, because it's one of the main things. Everything changes if you come from a privilegedly economical,
economical is the first
level.
Privilege. Yes.
For example, just like Kosovo, which is not very privileged when it comes to economics, and the rest of the Europe, for example. So you can kind of compare those things, and you get to see how important are the economics into having even access to basic human rights.
And from this, only because we have no much more time, but to switch in your regions, are there these problems between rich and poor visible? Because we have all this Islamic State and jihadists. We have the idea that it's religious issues and so on. But maybe the money is
it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with religion. Consider that I arrived in the Middle East in 2007, and I read the Quran, I think, in 2015. I didn't need it. No, you need law. You need law. You don't need to be an expert. Law and economics. You don't need to be an expert of religion, honestly.
And do you see these power struggles and power problems also as economic in these regions? Can you see the traces of money in these conflicts that you see there?
Absolutely. But it's you know, when, for example, in Tunisia, which was a country where many foreign fighters came from, I always remember one of them, and basically told me, look, we are going to Libya. Most of them go to Libya because, of course, it's a bordering country. We go to Libya, just as in the past years, we went to Italy and France, just looking for a job. So jihad for Tunisians was basically a job. And for foreign fighters from Bosnia, for example, was something psychological. They all grew up during, the war years, and basically they had this idea. I remember very well a foreign fighter I met in Sarajevo saying, "I don't want any other child to be the child I was," and that's why he went to Syria. And I was in the Philippines, in Mindanao, in the south, and for jihadists in the Philippines, when everybody, all newspapers, the headlines were, the resurgence of the Islamic State. It was very funny because basically I didn't know anything about the Philippines, of course, because like most of us, we just arrived and we don't know anything, and we live in these bubbles, and consider that when we went to Donbass for the war in Ukraine, some of us, we got the wrong flight and we ended up in Moldova. Then we had to go, land borders to Ukraine. We had no idea where Ukraine was. And in the Philippines, when I arrived there, I just realized that this, suddenly the Islamic State. Well, there is an uprising in this island of the Philippines. It started in the 16th century, so it's not really something that started, with Islamic State. And basically it was a deal between these rebels that got, they just got the flag, the black flag of the Islamic State, and this was a way, to scare President Duterte, to scare the international community, to get attention, to get money, to get weapons, and for the Islamic State was the way, we are in the Philippines. But I remember at some point I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was based in Baghdad at the time, and one of the jihadists asked me, "What is Baghdad?" Great. So the Islamic State, I was thinking, look, it's a few miles away from your capital city. So it's nothing to do with, definitely, with religion. I'm basically, I switched to journalism to cover, I didn't decide to be a war reporter. I just switched to journalism because I was in Italy working for Amnesty International, and I was watching on TV the Arab Spring. And actually was for me the uprising of my generation, was an uprising for dignity, for freedom, and I would say one of my last memories of Aleppo, I was in Italy, because at that point, my main mistake, I left Aleppo several years. I was the last Western reporter to get out, but still, not because there was Islamic State, but because no one cared. And so basically, I watched the siege of Aleppo in the end on TV. And at some point, I was in Italy, and there was a truce, a few hours of truce, and I watched on YouTube a video posted by an activist, by a Syrian, and so it was Friday. And there were these Syrians literally coming out from the rubble. I lived in the rubble because it was a place less likely to be bombed again, so we lived in the ruins, actually. Was safer. So you could see in this video, they came out from literally out of the rubble, and it was Friday. So I knew how they were feeling because, when I went out of Aleppo, I was 47 kilos, because there was nothing to eat. We had no water, nothing. And we were starving, and we were totally forgotten. So they in the first minutes of this truce, they went out, and I could see on YouTube, and they had a demonstration, because it was Friday, the day of demonstrations, and the only difference compared to the beginning was not only a demonstration against the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but also against Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And I watched, this unbelievable demonstration. It was a demonstration for freedom and dignity. And I said, even if Syria destroyed my life, it was really an honor to be there. Really honor to share my life with Syrians. Never seen something like that.
Oh, that is the word to end our discussion. Very nice. Thank you for hearing.
Time. I would just add something very quickly.
Yes.
Thank you. So when you mentioned bubble, it came to my mind this echo, boundary echo kind of room thing. in which basically is the place when we listen what we want to listen and we listen to the same opinions. So basically we surround ourselves with people who think like us, and what happens is always hearing the things you actually believe on. So you have like no opposite to that. And when it comes to cancel culture, that's what I think about, because like we are in that echo room that we don't allow anybody else to say anything that we don't agree with them, because otherwise we're just going to cancel them and not be around them. So I think that's why it's very important not to listen to yourselves and your opinions all the time, but you also have different perspectives in, in which you try to learn and to see why people think the way they did. Because if somebody has a problem, or they use words that they shouldn't use and they get cancelled because of that, it doesn't make them bad people.
Yes, of course.
So yeah,
and to open these bubbles.
Absolutely,
it's the moment. It's the moment to leave this cancel culture idea and to open it. And the first thing that Ralph told in this example with the interview with the right-wing thinker and philosopher was that to open it to discussion also. Absolutely. For him, and to hear it. And maybe is this the only way at least, but we need all these things. And for me, discussion was really great, because we hear so many aspects and so many things to think more about it. And I hope also for you, and thank you for hearing us, and yes, be aware of all these problems. Thank you. But it was very interesting.